Are you potentially overspending on your next gaming PC build, or trying to trim down a parts list that's gone just a little over budget? Well, if so, you're in the right place, because in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to save money on your build without necessarily losing out on frame rate. Let's do this. Picking the components for your first or next gaming PC build can be a particularly difficult conundrum, and it doesn't get easier necessarily with the more PCs you build. With so many parts choices out there for different components, it can be tricky to know which ones to pick, and whether different manufacturers provide better value than each other. Obviously, there's 1,000,001 ways to change a build parts list and save some money, but in this video, I'm going to look at the key mistakes people often make, and the areas I think you've got a good chance of saving some cash. And the first of those is with your motherboard choice. Now, at a really simple level, motherboards come in a range of different chipsets. On the new Intel 12th gen lineup, you've got Z690 at the high end, B660 on the slightly cheaper end, right down to Intel's H lineup of chipsets too. You might by default go ahead and pick a budget Z690 board, thinking that you're being quite shrewd with the cash. A high-end chipset, but a slightly lower end motherboard, a win-win, right? Well, that all depends on the features you're looking for. Both of these motherboards actually offer quite similar feature sets. They both support DDR4 memory, they both support at least 2 Gen 4 PCIe SSDs, and they both support CPU and RAM overclocking. Yet one is $100 cheaper than the other one. Now, there is of course things that set this MSI board apart and make the Z690 chipset more viable, and we've done a full write-up over on our website talking more about this. But spoiler alert, those features tend to be PCIe Generation 5, something no one going for less than a 3090 Ti is going to ever use, and greater overclocking support. Something which, let's be honest, you could save, get a better CPU with better clock speeds out of the box, and go for the cheaper motherboard. A motherboard is a great way to save money because it's not going to directly impact your performance. The speed at which your CPU, memory, and GPU communicate with one another out of the box is no different from a low-end board to a high-end board. That's not to say you should go onto PC Part Picker and sort by price lowest to highest, because you will be making some serious compromises. But look at the features you're going for and see if they're available on a cheaper design. The motherboard then is the first great way to save a bit of cash. The next way to save some serious money is with your case choice. Now, this might sound like an easy way to save out on your build. A case, once again, doesn't directly impact your system's performance, as long, of course, as it's got decent airflow and physically fits all your parts inside of it. To give a good example, you could spend $150 on a high-end Corsair 4 or 5000 series chassis, but it's not going to give you any more by way of frame rate than their own 275R airflow, which you could previously pick up for $50. But once again, these are extreme examples, and if you're trying to save $100 in your $1,000 build where you've overspent very slightly, all you actually need to do is save $12 per component to get to that key $100 saving. That could be the difference between buying a comparable case from Corsair and Cooler Master with a very similar feature set and just saving yourself the $10, or by going for Corsair's Airflow case rather than one of their IQ versions and buying some RGB fans yourself rather than picking one up with them already installed, where you'll naturally pay a bit of a price premium. Saving money in your build doesn't have to mean drastically ruining it by taking something that looked great and making it look pretty shit. The next key way to save a bit of cash is with your CPU choice, something I discussed a bit earlier on. There's a few ways to save money with your CPU. If you're going for an Intel chip, are you going for a K-series processor? If so, why not consider a KF? The F designation just means it's the same CPU without any built-in graphics. And if you're building a gaming PC, you're going to have a GPU anyway and won't need a CPU with graphics on board, as your GPU will take over all of those responsibilities and your CPU graphics will never ever get used. It's a similar story with Ryzen 2, where cost savings can be made there. Another great way of saving money with a CPU is to look at the overclockable version and the non-overclockable version. And what I'm about to say is probably not what you're expecting. Typically, people will buy the overclockable CPU and then an expensive motherboard that's purposely good at overclocking, when actually the overclocking CPUs often come with better clock speeds out of the box. Have you ever considered taking an overclockable CPU, like the Ryzen 56 12600X or Intel's Core i5-12600K and pairing it up with a non-overclocking motherboard, or a motherboard that's just not quite so strong in that department, but technically still supports it. Like our friend, GeekaWhat's B660 DS3H. On paper supports a bit of overclocking, but isn't going to get you too far. What that means is that rather than going for a cheaper motherboard and a cheap CPU and just getting crap clock speeds, buy a chip with a better clock speed for another $20 or so and save yourself $50 on the motherboard. It doesn't have to be an all overclocking or no overclocking choice at all. But here's one that's really going to blow your mind, especially if you're a first time builder. And to demonstrate, I'm going to need to go and get a few GPUs. 3080. Right. Do not drop the GPUs. Do not drop the GPUs. GPUs. I think these need organising and then I'll make my point. I dropped the GPUs. Oh no. No. That's enough of the tomfoolery. What is actually my point regarding GPUs? Well, GPU designs are designed originally by NVIDIA or AMD. They create what's called the reference board, which manufacturers like Asus or GeekaWhat can then take, tweak, and add their own cooler to. Each manufacturer will then release a range of different coolers. Over here, I've got one of GeekaWhat's lowest end 3050 designs, which is designed very close to the reference board. And then over here, I've got one of Asus's high-end 3050 designs. In fact, they're highest end. Now, the card on my right has 3 fans rather than 2, has faster clock speeds from the factory, and overall just looks a lot nicer. But you'll pay a huge price premium for it. Is this a better card than this? As far as raw performance goes, technically yes. But on a price to performance metric, this throws away many of the gains that a card like the 3050 gets in the first place. And believe it or not, this RTX 3050 is probably priced closer to a cheap RTX 3060 than it is a cheaper 3050. And what that means is be careful opting for an upgraded GPU, because it might actually get closer to its bigger brother counterpart in price than it does in performance away from the lower end models. It's better to buy the best possible GPU you can, but with the cheapest cooler. And this is a pattern that carries on all throughout GPUs, on both AMD and NVIDIA. This 3060 I just picked up is MSI's Gaming X Trio design, their highest range 3050. And it probably costs you just about the same amount of money as this Founders Edition RTX 3060 Ti. And the story carries on. This MSI RTX 3080 Supreme is gorgeous. The cooler is incredible and the design looks so good. But I think you can guess what's coming next. Price-wise, it's far too close to this GeekaWhat 3080 Ti to not have that conversation with yourself. Is this actually as good value as what I once thought? Now, that's not to say high-end coolers don't have a place in the market. For enthusiasts like me, having a Supreme in your build is a bit of bragging rights that you just can't turn down. And on the higher-end SKUs, an RTX 3070 Ti or above, these beefy coolers make more sense, because you're already spending like $700 on a GPU. What's another $100 on an upgraded cooler? Spoiler alert, $100 on an upgraded cooler for a 3050 means you may as well just buy a 3060 instead. But this point is even more relevant right now than it ever has been. Because GPU demand has been so high, manufacturers have been able to get away with selling their higher end designs like the Supreme, Strix or Gaming X Trio because people were so desperate for GPUs. As the market returns to normal, more of the dual fan coolers for lower end cards and designs like GeekaWhat's Eagle range will come to the fore, saving gamers money. So watch out for the GPU you buy, because all may not be quite what it seems. And it doesn't end there, especially for the budget gamer out there. As point number 5, your CPU cooler choice is perhaps the best way yet to save a bit of cash. Now, Intel have recently upgraded their stock cooler, putting it pretty much on par with AMD's stock cooler design, which we've already commended as being excellent. These come included with most AMD and Intel chips, especially the ones that aren't overclockable, like the i5-12400F and i3-12100F. And believe it or not, they do a good job of keeping the CPU cool. They're not the quietest in the world, and nor will they give you basically any overclocking headroom, but providing they can keep your CPU below like 85 degrees Celsius, they're going to do a good enough job. But for some people, a stock cooler's not going to be enough. It might look a bit too crappy for your build aesthetic, or maybe it's too loud for your silent gaming room operation. And that's a very valid point, but the way to go about it is to look at high-end air coolers rather than expensive all-in-ones. Take this 360mm Corsair cooler. It is stunning, it is beautiful, it is a great looking piece of kit. But at over $150, why don't you just pick up a double fan air cooler, or one of Corsair's own cheaper 240mm units? If it's because you want maximum overclocking headroom, you want the best aesthetics and a huge radiator for bragging rights, then go for it. No one is to tell you that that's a poor hardware choice, but if you're looking to save money, consider that $40, $50 or $60 cooler first. Check out the reviews of that and the temperatures, because the likelihood is, if you spend another $50, you might only be losing a few more degrees. That isn't going to make any difference to your frame rate when it comes to the performance department. A couple of extra cool ways to save money include bundles, which are particularly prominent in 2022, amid a GPU shortage that is admittedly ending, but still going on in the background, where manufacturers are giving great discounts on motherboards, CPUs, RAM, cases, literally everything. Retailers around the world to have a look at those, and we'll link some great options in the description below. To summarise, your motherboard, case, CPU cooler, GPU are all great ways to save money. And why not look at your power supply too? Do you really need that 900, 800 watt 80 plus gold unit? Probably not, because PC Part Bigger says your system only wants 500. Have a look at your minimum recommended power supply requirements for your graphics card and go from there. Don't unnecessarily scrimp out on your components, but also don't write off saving $20 here and there, because those figures can quickly add up and help your build get firmly back on track when it comes to the budget department. That pretty much wraps it up for this one. If you enjoyed it, something a bit different, make sure to drop a like rating. I'm going to go and tape up my GPU boxes. Cry. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.